Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who have joined us on this Dr. Fundi channel via multiple social media platforms, via Facebook, via YouTube, via Twitter, via Instagram, and also via the Dr. Fundi website. My name is Fundi Lenyati, and I'm the host on the channel. Today, we have a very, very interesting interview or conversation in prospect. As you know, it's a Sunday, and on Sundays, we normally look for a South African who is doing great things, in whatever area of endeavor or profession that they have chosen. So today, we have a very, very interesting, guest, and our guest is Dr. Mohlopheni Marakalala. Mohlopheni Jackson Marakalala. This gentleman was born in a village of Mohlopheni in Limpopo province. Those who know a bit of geography, is it under Gamukopane or Potgietersrus? Nowadays we don't use that word Potgietersrus, we use Gamukopane. So he hails from that village in Gamukopane. He did his undergraduate studies at the University of North, which is now called Limpopo. And then afterwards, he went and did a PhD at the University of Cape Town, and he got that PhD in 2008. That's almost 13 years ago. Thereafter, he did a total of 8 years of what we call postdoctoral training. 4 years at UCT, and also 4 years at Harvard in Massachusetts, in the US, at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He's currently a faculty member at the Africa Health Research Institute, ASRI, and also an associate professor at the University College of London. His lab primary interest is on infectious diseases, particularly the immunopathogenesis of TB. So this is a guru. This gentleman is a guru on matters of, germs, especially when it comes to TB. He's working on innovative stuff to help us as healthcare professionals to better diagnose, using newer methods. We talk of biomarkers. People will remember biomarkers as things that are, used to diagnose cancers, and other things. But he is looking at how we can diagnose, TB using biomarkers, but also looking at different ways of fighting the germ TB, by leveraging, certain, innate abilities within our bodies. But he'll talk more about those things. I mustn't, put myself under difficulties in trying to explain something that the expert is here to explain. So, but anyway, so that's his area of interest, immunopathogenesis of TB, with the aim of developing host-directed therapies targeting lung inflammation. His other interests are in understanding the strategies utilized by mycobacteria, to survive various arms of the immune system. When I was advertising this conversation, I mentioned that TB is one of those very, very clever and very, very tricky germs, and it is always looking at ways of, outwitting whatever that the scientists are coming up with. So he's busy then trying to see how do we, as the human beings, outwit this germ. So he has a lab, and his lab is, funded by grants from the South African Medical Research Council, the Melinda Gates Foundation, and also the Wellcome Trust. All right. So basically, there is so much that we can say about him. Some of his personal achievements include him being recognized as a rising star at the 2019 Grand Challenges meeting, at the NRF Emerging Researcher Excellence Award 2018, South African Medical Research Council Scientific Merit Award, Silver Medal 2016, UCT 2016 College of Fellows Young Researcher Award. He was named the Fellow of the Next Einstein Forum in 2016, which is awarded to young scientists throughout Africa who are using science as a platform to solve global challenges. He was honored as a World Economic Forum Young Scientist at the WEF New Champions Meeting in Dalian, China in 2015. He was also the recipient of the Sydney Brenner Fellowship 2010 to 2012, that's awarded by the Academy of Sciences in South Africa to an outstanding young scientist working in South Africa. He was awarded the Bronte Stewart Research Prize for the most meritorious PhD thesis in the Faculty of Health Sciences at UCT. That was in 2008. So yeah, in my language, when we are talking of somebody who has studied so much, some people may not understand the language I'm going to use. My mother tongue is Xhosa, but we say ufunde waitekeza. He is so learned. He is full of education. It's coming out of his mouth. It's coming out of his ears. It's coming out of any opening of the body. I'm still waiting for somebody who is Ndebele and also who is Pedi, who is also going to give me an equivalent of somebody who has spent so much time, learning and being so educated. On those words, Dr. Mohlopheni, Marakalala, welcome to the Dr. Fundi channel.
It's a great pleasure and a great sense of, humility. And, I'm really, really honored to be in this channel, considering the great work that you've been doing educationally to transfer knowledge to communities, even in a very available language platform to anyone. And I'm really, really honored to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation. And that very kind introduction, I have to say, listening particularly where I come from, the village, the knowledge there, it's really humbling considering that journey. But what's really more important for me is that I'm more connected to the roots, and that's what's more of my pride than anything else. And thanks for considering that in the introduction.
Beautiful, beautiful. Like I said earlier, we get to know people because of the great things that they are doing. But most times we don't look back and say, where did it all start? So for me, I think what is important is that we must link your achievements and be able to trace back to what kind of family you came from, what kind of community you came from, what kind of values, that were actually instilled in you, which are still helping you as a compass as you navigate life. So, Mosesechane in Limpopo, Mukopane. Please tell us a little bit about that village.
So Mosesechane is a village itself. Mukopane is a town, which as you said, is to be called Patkutesres. So Mukopane is 215 kilometers north of Pretoria and about 55 kilometers south of Polokwane. Yes. So that's the town that largely was dependent on farming with nearby, old, like farmers, as you know, but also we also have 2 platinum mines in the environment, so which currently is the main source of employment. And then so my town, as you know, previously during the era of homelands, so the town was more central. But I lived in a village, Mosesechane, which was 15 kilometers from town. But when you went to town, you actually would cross a pseudo border like Grens, where you enter now the central and you come into the homeland of Leboa. So that's where I grew up. So as you can imagine, starting from the beginning, the village is a village that truly defines that it takes a village to raise a child. Because where I grew up, any person was an elder. Whether it's at church, whether it's in a community stock fair, if you call it, then it's society, or whether it was in a sporting field, anywhere at school. So each elderly was my parent. Yes. So an elderly woman is my mother that I can get advices to. And then the same thing.
And they had permission to actually discipline you if you go out of line and pull you to the house and say, I've beaten your child. They were doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's
punishment.
Precisely. So that's exactly where I come from, where we were lucky to really be abroad within this very rich background of disciplined men and women. Although level of education in the current educational system, we're not really very privileged. But we learned so much from the wisdom that was inherent in those people who saw the struggle, especially rural women who actually had to carry aloft dreams of their children, making it happen, that they have to really advance and get similar things that we're highlighting right now. So we owe our little success to those people who themselves were never privileged because of the system to really reach it, but they made it a point that this should be the end, that new generation should actually have these privileges as we have. So that's the village. The village is largely the so-called Northern Sotho, like Bapedi, but our local king is Mundrebele, Mokopane is Mundrebele.
I was about to ask you because in that part of the world, that is in Gamukopane, that's where you got Northern Ndebeles, all right?
That's
yes, and Northern Ndebeles, you know, slightly different from the Southern Ndebeles. And the Northern Ndebeles, because of where they are and the majority of the people around being Pedi-speaking people, you guys tend to then, you are able to speak and both Sepedi and also Sindebele. To an extent that I now have a name for you. Remember, I said I was waiting for somebody to tell me when I was talking about somebody who's highly educated. You know, now Kasipedi, they say Kakapa Khotsa Tuto. All right. Ngangaba Nge Tivundo. All right. In your language, Debele is Kakapa Komangan Khotsa Tuto. Yeah, that's difficult. But anyway, there are phrases in your language for somebody who is highly, highly learned. Forgive me for pronunciation that is not so great, but you know, I thought I needed to get somebody who speaks the language to just write for me so that I can try and say that. But anyway, so but let's get to your family now. What kind of family did you grow up in? We now know at least the kind of community that you grew up in, very communal, you know, takes a village to grow up the child, you know, it's a mining town, you know, people not very learned, but very wise. And you know, they didn't have opportunities because of the past, you know, politics of this country. But when you get to your family now, what kind of family did you grow up in?
Sure. So first, I was born in a hospital in Tembisa, the famous Tembisa hospital, but because my mother was a laborer working in Gauteng, so she worked in a restaurant in Grand Central Airport. So there's a small airport between Pretoria and Halfway House. So the places, I think there were cottages where she stayed, where Africa Mall of Africa is right now. So when I come there, when I was driving my mother recently there, I asked her to tell me where exactly did you stay when I was born in Tembisa Hospital, when you were a laborer here in Gauteng? Yes, and then so she pointed very close to Mall of Africa. So I was born in Tembisa Hospital, but then because my mother was working there, but because of labor, so we were growing under circumstances where we see our parents after a month when they come and visit, which was common. And then we were a family of 7 with 1 sister. So six brothers.
An army of boys.
It was an army of boys with names too, as you can imagine, the old English names too, highly biblical. We had Joseph, James, Elizabeth, John, you know, Simon, and then my younger brother is Malusi, who is like a shepherd. So I'm the only one who's Mohlopheni Jackson, which is not really biblical. So, but the name is being in this generations for 6. It's being in the family for 6 generations, including Jackson. So the reason I haven't dropped Jackson as an English name is because it carries significance. So, and Mohlopheni. So so I'm the 6th. So of the 7, followed by my younger brother. So my younger brother and I are the people who are privileged enough to go to university. And my sister went to college, but the rest actually finished like they went to the so-called, the old standard 8, what do they call that? Again, I don't know, Form 3.
Yes.
Yes, but then because of circumstances, then you didn't have many people aspiring to study like we have today. But we were privileged that they worked and they managed to have families, managed to take their kids to school. So the generation is going. But yeah, so one thing that I respect with my mother is while she was a laborer, but one thing I always cried to be like other kids who'd go to boarding schools, kids who largely belong to families of teachers and nurses. So that's where the most educated people in the village. So we didn't have a doctor, we didn't have an engineer, we didn't have, and our dreams were about that, being a teacher or a nurse or a clerk. A clerk, I think, is the equivalent of an administrator of some sort, but using a computer. Yes. So one thing that I felt I was deprived was an opportunity to go to a good school when I was young, and I always cried to my mother, but I realized it would have been too much a burden to her to go to boarding school. So I went to school like any other kids, many kids in rural areas. We went to school under a tree, for instance, in my grade in 1, which is grade 8. And then our matric, for instance, in the school where I was, the school was relatively new, and 2 matrics before mine, they got 100% fail. And so the school was almost closed down. So I was one of the first. So humbly, so I was one of the first people to really pass with grades that would take us to university. But we also had one matric, what do they call that? Maths textbook, the matric text, the red one. I forgot what you used to call classroom mathematics. So we had one in a class of 32 people that we had to rotate. And I'm very, very grateful to such teachers who worked so hard and the little that we managed to get from such an environment. So from there, I was surprised that my mother all along had been putting money, not to take me to school, but actually when I went to tertiary, so I had registration and money that would pay half of my fees because I was also on loans. So half of my fees were paid by my mother completely. The entire undergraduate. So this is the kind of mother who wanted for me to have something, and she was aware, regularly checking what I wanted to be. And I'll tell more about the details until I got to the level of PhD. So there were times where I would get a job, and then she'd say, "No, but this is taking yourself away from the original dream. So please remember that you have to get to that red gown." So that's the mother that I had, and the siblings have been very, very supportive. And so we are very, very friendly with each other when we meet each other, and it's a family. So people would say those were impoverished environment, but I don't think we were impoverished when you had such love and connectivity at a societal level.
So education was a big thing for your mom, clearly. Respect, the community and also your family. What else are the values that you say they are still driving you even today?
Well, I think my mother, she's very, very intelligent. So like I say, there are people who are from townships who at the age of my mother were studied, right? Others were principals, others were. So if you go to Bantu, the old Bantu stands and, those Bolibua, like Matanzimas,
Yes.
You'll see there will be a lot of people who were traditionally Black communities, educated, especially with missionary schools and so on. And then those who come from townships would have earlier access. So those from villages are always were actually behind in terms of that. So I envy one thing that I feel like when I think of, I don't want to dwell much into the atrocities of our past history in apartheid, but one thing that I feel jealous is if someone like my mother had that opportunity to really study and get to where we are, I think should have been something really. So I really admire her ability for maths. Like when I was at school, she gives you money, she would actually know every cent when she gets a statement. And her advices about life. Funny enough, when I design my projects, for instance, I would design when I was still a PhD student, so I would tell her the experiment that I'm doing, and she would actually give me an analogy, more like a traditional analogy, but to give a better perspective how I could approach these things. So she's been like a partner in my career, while she actually doesn't have education, but a partner.
That's very important, Doc, because again, there is this belief that if people haven't gone far with education, They are
Yes.
stupid. So what you've
Yeah.
just said now is that actually, even though she didn't go far with education, wisdom,
Yeah.
she has great wisdom, and she was able to help and guide you through your journey, in
Yeah.
spite of the fact that she did not even get to, half of the levels that you got to education
Absolutely.
wise.
Yeah, so in fact, to add to that, her mother, who we recently lost last year, that's my grandmother. She was in her 90s. And then, so I was lucky enough to meet my mother's grandmother,
Yes,
so I was amazed with this lineage, so this generation with their wisdom. So
yeah,
first, my passion is history. I'm very, very
yeah,
interested in history. That I learned so much from them, but the wisdom to discern good from bad and the discipline part to stand firm, even
yeah,
most challenging circumstances that we ourselves cannot withstand right now.
yeah,
It's one of the things that are very, very inspiring. The wisdom is very, very inspiring that I don't think there's a surrogate that you can get in a book with
yeah,
those people that we interacted.
yes,
And I count myself lucky to have come from a generation where I had access to people who had inherent wisdom that came from understanding life, sometimes from
mm,
experience, sometimes from pain, sometimes from the
yes,
treatment of the old atrocities. So those
yes,
two, I think of ourselves as a transcending generation. We have benefit of the both. They
yeah,
knew they knew technology, like with the fourth industrial revolution, but also having the
yes,
wisdom of the old. Yeah.
yes. Now, when I posted yesterday that I'm gonna be interviewing you today, I think, oh no, this morning, a
Yes.
number of people who commented, they talk about your humility, that you are a top scientist. They've worked closely with you, but one thing that stands out is your brilliance and your humility. So, would you say this humility is something that clearly is coming from the teachings, of your mom, where irrespective of what you achieve, but you are
Yeah.
still a human being and you must treat others,
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah, I would say humility. I mean, this humility is the biggest charm. Like really, no matter how whatever you achieve in life, if you cannot have humility to be approachable, I think it takes away the entire thing. But my
Yeah,
background, because I've seen suffering, when I see someone, when I'm with my colleagues in a boardroom and I see someone who's a cleaner spill something, I would go
yeah,
and clean that because I see my own mom there. I see my own
yes,
aunt there. And I
yes,
know that I was raised through that background. But
yes,
also, I think I was also trained by very humble people, like I mentioned some point. So people who were mentors like Prof. Mayosi was my career
yes,
development. Also very, very intelligent, talented people, but the
mm,
smile, the humility, and never looking down at any person. So those
yes,
are very, very powerful people. Like I was lucky, I may mention later some of the people that
yes,
I directly got supervised, whether it's at Harvard, whether it's at UCT, whether it's University of Limpopo. But even the teachers from high school, so we're lucky to really rub shoulders with people who are very, very talented, but you cannot
yes,
see it. So the
yes,
humility has been for me as being the most charming thing that you see in people who are very intelligent. And I don't
yes,
think I'm intelligent myself like those people I'm mentioning, but I think humility to me is the first thing that attracts masses to feel at home. So I'm
yes, yes,
glad that
yes.
there are people who think that I'm humble and I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely talk. All right, let's move quickly now to your schooling years. Just any highlights, especially in secondary education, because I'm now trying to see what your thoughts were in terms of post-matric kind of education. So, what were your highlights, especially in the math and science, biology side of things?
Well, I think it's very interesting because then as I mentioned, so I almost didn't make it to school that I was going because we were late for registration and it was relatively a new school. So they didn't take me, but I kept together with a friend, we kept on visiting the school until sort of we forced them to admit us. And I was happy
Yeah,
to grab a chair, walk 200 meters to under that marula tree and be part of a class. So
yeah,
that was so I'll define so I came, that was a school that was generally new and I came from a different village. So the school
yeah,
was exciting, but when I found the school, I met new people who at primary school. I thought I was doing very well. And I
yeah,
met new smart people now, and it's a challenge to fit in. Luckily, somehow I managed to fit in and achieve like others. And then the same journey. So my highlights then would be to, like, we had teachers who were very inspiring, who were young. Like our principal actually opened that school at the age of 31. He had just finished his B education, I think, at University of the North, then University of Limpopo now. So that man was very, very inspiring. But I also had a teacher, like some of them are even on Facebook, probably. It's a guy who was, his name was Lipondo. And then there were teachers like much, so they were very good, except that we were not well resourced in terms of facilities, in terms of
laboratories and things like that.
Those were just a dream. And then living books, but just being taught by those great minds, people who had gone out and absorbed that education, even from a college of teaching, you know, like they came from that. There will be one or two.
There was a college there that was called Stutulwane. I'm not sure if
yes. So ours was called Mokopane Teaching College of Education. So a lot of them were converted into FETs, but we had colleges there. Yes, so we had a lot of teachers coming from colleges. But for me, just to get inspiration and motivation from them was great. But my highlight was really, as I mentioned, maybe I should mention, so I was the first person to get an exemption in the school. And I think the school was on the brink of closing down because we had 100% failure.
100% failure.
In the first metric. Second metric, we had 2S. So S then means when you obtained F, it's a
school living. It was called school living. You couldn't go to university with that. The best you could be is to go and hustle for a job at the Limua, government department.
Yes. So my highlight then was actually being one of the first people to put the school on the map, because I had applied for medical school then. Imagine coming from a school like that. But then my principal went with me to have early access to the results. And we found the inspector was very, very strict in the circuit. So when he was going through the results, he couldn't believe it in front of my principal that a student from that school got those marks. So me watching the pride on the principal's face, and also so that in itself, when you look back, the school started doing very well from those years. So my humble association with such a school that almost closed down, but with whatever we had, we actually made ends meet. So that in itself, and of course there were moments where I represented school. That was cool to do something called Maths Olympiad, the AMESAs.
Yes, I see that. Yes.
In the school, and they selected us from school. We went to circuit. I was lucky to represent circuit, and I went to district. I represented district, and we went to the university, where University of the North representing the entire province now. So the people from Mbelwe, probably know Mbelwe High School.
Yes, Mbelwe, that's from Venda, from the Vembe region. Means that is one school that has been churning out top performers. Most people who come from that part of the world, they went to Mbelwe. But I think 2 weeks ago, I interviewed Gundo Maswime. And he went to a different school. He didn't go to Mbelwe.
Oh, there's also Papuri there. So what happened then? Those schools, so in the finals, when you're writing those AMESA, there were like a lot of us in a hall in University of the North then. And we had a lot of people from Mbelwe, like there were schools like Taxane, PAX, and so on, but boarding schools, like very good schools. So I was the one person representing, amongst two maybe, representing our circuit. And then, but I was surprised that when they called top 10, I was in the top 10 amongst Mbelwe students. And I was like, wow,
beautiful.
Some of these things I felt were luck. And also meeting preparation.
Give yourself some credit, Doc.
No. To be honest, the Olympiad with those, they wanted people to really utilize formulas that are taught, and people had to approach maths in a different manner. For me, was that old, if you think of the long division method. So that's how I taught. So for me to really even make it to top 10, that's why I started having sense of belief that, look, perhaps we have what it takes. Yeah. So what really validated that the highlight is getting good results to go to university. Yeah.
Yes. And you wanted to do medicine?
I did. So I actually got shortlisted for interview at VETS. And I think today I'm going to share what then I would have looked at as embarrassing, but I think it was an empowering moment. So I got invited. So as a medical person yourself, you'd know that with I think also in at UCT when we're sitting this committee. So the selections are made even from grade 11 results, but they also look into biographical questionnaires, they include interviews. When the results come, basically, it's just a component of other things that they consider on. So coming from a school where English we were taught, but more like a third language, where it was more like a translation.
The teachers themselves were not even confident in the Queen's language. I mean, if you could go or follow them when they're going to sales house to negotiate paying their accounts, you'll be surprised at how much they were butchering the Queen's language.
Well, yes, that could be true, but I think in honor of our teachers, I think our teachers are very good here, and
Okay.
if they are listening, we are grateful because their foundation really started us somewhere. But then when I went to Brits, my mistake is that I didn't tell my English teacher, I didn't tell principal, so I was just absent from class because I thought it like not allowed for me to dodge class to go to interview to med school. So I was taken by my sister to Parktown Vets Medical School, and I got there and I was interviewed with two ladies who came with blazers and medals here, and I was wearing my jersey from sales. I was probably then, and then we're having a calamine here because I had a pimple, and I was just. And then these kids came with families, grandfathers with moral support with Mercedes-Benz. You could see they were prepared, they were reading something. And I didn't even know that I had to read for interviews. So I got there and I think I found my biographical questionnaire with my picture in front of the interviewers. But the Queen's language was very difficult to express myself in. And I tried, but I sort of knew when I left there that, but also the competition of getting to medical school is not about qualifying only, but there's still more competition amongst people who qualify because everyone wanted to do medicine then and space was very limited. So I didn't make it, but Vets instead offered me a position, a space to do social sciences, something that I didn't even apply. So I was about to do social sciences, which I think is a great course, but my principal said, no, but this is not linked to your dream. You cannot take it. And then so
I like that principle. I like that principle, because he knew your potential, he knew your strengths, and he knew that your future is with science, is with science and maths and stuff like that.
Yes, but then Medunsa too, because I applied to Medunsa, I think they accepted me my second choice, which I think was dentistry. In fact, not dentistry, I think was dental therapy.
Yeah.
And then that too, I thought it's dentistry, but then I inquired and then with a local dentist and he sort of explained, but I felt, okay, look, so one teacher, his name is Lupondo, told me that you can go with these results, you can go to Turfloop, register, you're definitely going to do either pharmacy or BSc with this result they're going to take you.
Yeah.
And then you apply to Medunsa, many people would do that after first degree, which is BSc.
Yes.
And
it
then
would be called a pre-med.
Exactly. So then they would start your second year or something or third year. So most of my friends did that. So unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. So at the end of that BSc, I actually got selected with two of us to be part of a US program that came with isolating some samples in the gold mine in Secunda, Evander, Billiton. That's where Billiton was. So we went underground to isolate bacteria. We went to University of Free State with American students and we isolated like genes, like DNA, like cloning, we learned PCR. And they selected us that year when I was doing third year. And so that's where I got inspired to really wanted to do more research. And I didn't apply to medical school. But what I did was more also of, I'll tell you more why I got interested in TB. It was more HIV. The reason I wanted to be a doctor is because I grew up in the 90s, 80s really, 90s. But after 1983, South Africa more around 86, 87, that's when we started hearing a lot about HIV. And then, but which seemed far from us. But then when things started happening in the 90s, and then there were these talk shows like Tlokalatsela on Tobela FM, and I was listening about this thing and I felt like my calling. So I always wanted to, growing up as a Catholic kid who also wanted to be a priest one day. So I had this calling that I wanted to do something, but I felt, what if my calling is to find cure for this HIV? And then so I wanted to be a doctor because of that. So that's the connection. But then it didn't fall too far because now I'm actually doing TB also in a setup where I have HIV, high HIV.
A few people that I've interviewed, before, they will tell me a similar story that, I wanted to do this. I wanted to go and do medicine, but then I ended up having going to do BSc and stuff. And what I would say to them is that, there's the big man up there. Sometimes you think it's a rejection, but maybe it's a redirection, towards what will take you closer to your life purpose, and obviously at the time you don't know, why this is not happening. But when you look back now, I'm sure you can see that it was a redirection so that you could get through your route. You are still a doctor, a real doctor for that matter, not a bachelor doctor. I normally say that when I'm teasing my colleagues and say, we become doctors with a bachelor degree, but actually, maybe we should be aiming at PhD level for us to be real doctors. But anyway, so you have been able to actually get to be called a doctor, and you are doing work that is even benefiting the very, people who went via the MPCHP route.
Yes, I mean, so there's not, in fact, my training has always been in a clinical setup where colleagues are medical doctors. In fact, I supervise few PhDs, and also when at UCT, they introduce this intercalated, when people would do medicine and take some break for a year and do honors in the lab. So I supervise a lot of medical students. And also I have some, so that in itself, brought some connection, and also being able to lecture like medicine. And so the love for medicine has always been there, but as someone would see patients, but also being able to work, for instance, in KwaZulu-Natal, where we have the epicenter of HIV and TB, especially in the north parts there.
In the north, yes.
Yeah, so those areas we tend to be close to rural medicine to see things where we feel like the work you do in the lab, or whether it's basic or clinical science, but it has a chance for translation into intervention at community level. So that is more fulfilling to really do work that goes beyond your publication, but it also influences policies and practice, but also lives at that community level that you can see with your life. So those were reasons where perhaps I would say I admire doctors, considering especially Africa, where we have a ratio of doctor to patient, which is very, very low, where actually like, but at the same time, encourage people to specialize and do clinical, do science, others. And but there's still so much demand that there should be those people in townships who are seeing doctors. There should be that GP, like, because if everyone specializes, they actually want to do PhDs, they sit in labs. So we rob ourselves of an opportunity to really take care of a patient. But at the same time, I admire knowledge of many people who are medical doctors and sort of transition into basic or clinical science in the lab. So those are well-rounded with the background of diseases, the background of many, many subjects that they studied, and actually having to take it into real discovery level and innovation is very, very inspiring. I mean, I gave examples of the like of Prof. Mayosi, Prof. Satere, Salome. There's a lot of people that now are coming, and we see this brilliance in them when they get to do science. So that hybrid is very rare, and we celebrate such brilliance. Yeah.
Beautiful, 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 Doc. So I think there's something that our former president Thabo Mbeki said when they were opening the school that's named after his name. This is maybe late last year, but he was being critical of academia in general, and people who go and do their masters or even PhDs. He was saying, so Africa requires people who must do the masters, who must do the PhDs, but with a view to solving Africa's problems. Not that he undermines or he's got any issue with those, but he felt other times people do masters, do PhDs, do the other researches, more to be cited, than them solving the societal problems. So I just wanted your comment on that.
Well, I think yes, to some extent, I would agree with him, but I would take it lower that actually I agree that Africa, or let's say the town that I come from, I mentioned mining and agriculture. Yes. where
Yes.
there's much mining and there's farming, but we don't have a subject that is offered as, like when people start science at school or any degree, there's always maths, there's always,
Yeah.
language and life orientation. But I think those subjects should perhaps be made not compulsory, but actually be available to all streams for people to know how to develop skills that would be relevant to societal challenges that are also unique to that society. So if you have mining, but in the same community, there's no one who's encouraged. If we have agriculture, but not many people would encourage people to go into farming, for instance. And then they would still think about, like science and maths, all this term, which is good. Agriculture is part of them, technically. So that's very important. But mining too, we should be having like, sorry for the little sound. So there should be, I'm in Durban,
You
so
can continue. No, you
have
can
good
continue.
cars. So mining, for instance, there should be like small courses in mining that are also more practical in imparting skills that will enable local people to really infiltrate this market and use that. So at the end, you have people who are sitting with this mining environment, agriculture environment, but cannot tap into that business and make it work for the society at large. So I think at large, we need education that's tailor-made with local challenges. For instance, when we have prevalence of, like now, like when we have HIV and TB as the major challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, I think there should be like a course that focus, one shouldn't specialize first before they do something related to HIV, but actually it should start at grassroots education. That even at high school, there could be a little module that is light, but it's linked to bio and talks about infectious diseases. That would actually implant a long-lasting desire to be connected and relevant to the challenge, that you see every day. So I agree with him, but I also think it's the citation part and everything. It's debatable, right? But I respect it very,
There's
very.
nothing wrong with being cited. It shows that your work was good. People wouldn't cite work that was, half baked. So, it's a sign of achievement that, your research or your publicized, kind of research has been cited by so many other people who are doing their own studies. So it's not a bad thing.
That's correct. Although citing, for me, my wish is that when people publish, they should be like, now we have platforms like your platform, for instance, you have the conversations. So we need those platforms that would make available findings that are scientific in a more community-friendly conversations, more like how other journals would actually write an editorial in a language that a policymaker or a government person who is not educated in that area can actually be able to understand and use that to influence policies. So I think some of the difficulties is having jargon that we publish that's heavy, but we need to find platforms that translate that into an available language.
Yes. About a month ago, there was an article on one of the newspapers here in Joburg, which was saying at the beginning of this COVID pandemic, there's been a problem where scientists, were finding it difficult to actually distill the information to the kind of, easy kind of language so that the average people can be able to understand. And this article was saying part of it is the fact that scientists did not want their work to be diluted or maybe even, put across in a way that distorts the work that they have done. However, since those days, March last year, things have improved because now there's much more connection between media and scientists, and many scientists are actually trying now to actually communicate in a language that an average person understands. I remember one of the meetings with the national minister on TV where they were going to announce the issue about the AstraZeneca vaccine. They brought in top scientists there, top. you know, and I also listened, you know, was obviously we were all worried, what is this meeting about?
Yes.
Without mentioning anybody's name, but I felt even myself as a medical professional, you know, they were talking above even myself. So I even worried that I wonder the average person who watches SABC, how much do they follow, you know, of this? Because it was about, you know, explaining to people that we secured these vaccines, you know, we were going to do 1, 2, 3. However, there is this research that has shown 1, 2, 3. And therefore, as a country, we now need to change course. But then the people who were supposed to explain that to the general public, you know, I think they failed to rise to the occasion. As a result, there was so much confusion. The minister had to come back 3 days later to try and simplify the message. So the point I'm trying to say, when you are dealing with something like this pandemic or other pandemics, I mean, we still have the HIV pandemic, it is important to actually get that scientific information distilled, you know, and communicated in a language that's accessible to people.
I agree. First, credit to one of the things, as much as COVID has been very difficult to scourge to our society, very painful to deal with, but we also draw positives in how actually governments consult widely with scientists who do the work. And also another thing, that scientists and government can come back and report to the society on TV and actually present how we see the models are done. Largely, I think the efforts are trying to make it like when Prof. Slim Abdul Karim, for instance, data, I admire. And then, but there are things that are also simplified for the person to really follow and get an idea of what's happening. So that's one thing that I felt with time, even journalism has really tapped into. While scientists can say it's diluted, but I think the balance is important. That was the point of doing work that will not be available and have impact at societal level. So I don't think, so I think there has to be a balance of the two, where you actually have work that people could check that is not deviated from the original findings when they are neutralized by media. But that neutralizing, if you call it, but it should actually work towards achieving more understanding, more availability even to a layman there. So COVID-19, you're right, taught us that. But I can give example. I've written like for the conversation media, which actually when there's a publication from the lab or on World TB, I would write about where we are and so on. So I would often struggle a bit with them when they want me to really write. For instance, when they say therapy, when I say host-directed therapy, they say find the word for therapy, and I struggle to find them totally. So there are those that I think, if you're not careful, and also the headline in the media, mainstream media, can be like it's meant to sell. So you could be working with HIV and actually just giving a study that's humbly trying to understand how the immune system works, that could be utilized to inform vaccine development. And their headline, for instance, could be like cure finally.
You see now.
And then you see that while so that it can be selling, and while it actually far from what actually that, so that in itself can distort or have overarching effects of one's work. So one has to go back and actually confirm that the neutralized or simplified language talks to real findings that you have been doing.
Yes. Now, Doc, so you left TEF. You went to do, you know, your PhD at UCT.
Yes.
But your journey to PhD was a different journey because you actually you were doing masters. Am I right?
Yes, I did masters.
And then you ended up on some accelerated situation, and you ended up with a PhD. Just talk to us about that, because for me, you know, that's something that's very interesting that you did.
Yeah. So when I left University of the North, University of Limpopo, I got 2 offers of masters, one at Wits. So I actually interviewed with SAB, South African Breweries. So as a young science graduate, I wanted to work, have a car, and like other kids in the neighborhood, right?
Yes, you can drive a car.
Yes, I interviewed with SAB after my honors, South African Brewery, as a brewing scientist or brewer. Yeah. And then I don't think we had like, that was 2003 December, and I think the communication by emails were poor. So I don't even if I got a response or anything because it was
Yeah,
during holidays. But then I also learned I got something called prestigious scholarship, NRF prestigious master's scholarship, equity and
yeah,
prestige. So, and then I felt like when I looked at the money, it was 33,000 of a scholarship. And I said, wow, okay. So I decided to do PhD I had applied for masters at VETS and at UCT, successful both. So I started at VETS working on Parkinson's diseases. And then,
yeah,
but 2 weeks later, I always felt Cape Town would be too far for someone from a village like mine. But a
yeah,
friend told me, just take a train. So a train was 27 hours. That's when they were introducing Kulula in one time, but flying was not an option then. So I went
yeah,
to Cape Town and actually I fell in love with the research I would do in TB, and the rest is history. So I did masters in chemical pathology, working on
yeah,
mechanisms utilized by the agent, the bacteria that cause TB, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So we've
yeah,
been interested how the bacteria detoxifies like first line drugs, what
yeah,
mechanisms the bacteria would develop resistance to this. So I was working on such a project in chemical pathology, which is more chemical pathology was a very clinical. We had a lot of registrars, we had consultants
yeah,
like Pete Lemon, was a very big department occupying the entire floor of Falmouth in
yeah,
UCT. That's 17 years ago. So it was very inspiring listening to these young trainees who were presenting cases, on an area that I always aspired to be, although I was really
yeah,
doing science in the lab. So it was a very inspiring environment here. So I did
yeah,
masters there. And after 2 years of masters at UCT, they had introduced something called upgrading. So upgrading would mean that if you had good findings that are good enough to take into PhD, you can opt not to write a thesis, but to write it as a motivation, your findings, to
yeah,
add questions that would actually complete into a PhD. So
yes,
then apparently it was very special because one had to achieve something to be upgraded.
yeah.
But but at the same time, it was a risk because if you didn't finish your PhD, you don't have masters. I upgraded. So luckily, the research committee at UCT deemed our work more upgradable into PhD. So then I upgraded into
Yeah.
PhD. PhD took me 2 extra years after that master's. And then I
That is
graduated in
that's
2008.
the reason why you got that recognition. What was it now? The most
Right.
meritorious PhD thesis in the Faculty of Health Sciences in
That's
2008.
correct. That's correct. Although I have to say, so yes, when I was named, so in the Faculty of Health Sciences at UCT, there's a ceremony of awards, including like medicine. So there's a day where there's awards. So there's always one award that for PhDs, they call it Most Meritorious Award. For
Yeah,
the Most Meritorious PhD Award, and it's called Bronte
yeah,
Stewart. And it comes
yeah,
with a certificate and money. So that money, I got 1,000 rand. Then was a lot of money. So when I got that PhD, I have to say there's something I want to say. If you realize my journey has always been to catch up. So I mentioned that I went to another village in a new school that was
yes,
new, and I was excited, but hey, people were up there. And then from there,
yeah,
when I caught up, and then I managed to go to University of Limpopo now. University setup was something where people from Soweto all over the world, if you know the history of
yeah,
Self-Loop, it's like Fort Hare, the college then. But
yeah,
actually,
yes,
this is
yes,
where Cyril Ramaphosa went, Matthews Posa, Tokyo Soale, people who were more in the north, whereas Fort Hare catered for the entire, before anyone else. So Self-Loop was the second black college to Mother
yes,
College, Fort Hare in
yes,
Alice. So going to Turfloop and being linked to that history of that place was like
yes,
fast, was really fast for me to didn't fit in. So I
yes,
took time. I was an average student at undergraduate, but luckily I started sort of managing things, and then
yeah,
that was catching up. And then now imagine now moving from there to VETS, although VETS was just a couple of weeks, and then from
yeah.
VETS to UCT was then the busiest
UCT.
environment. So that for me, I wasn't sure, even when I started writing and doing things, experiments, but somehow I also had to catch up. So it was a surprise that I was named the best PhD or the most meritorious PhD, which
Yeah,
then I felt like, wow. So, but what the greatest memory of that was that my mother and my late sister were there at the ceremony. So when I was actually awarded that, in fact, it's one of my highlights getting that award, mainly
yeah,
because it was in front of my mother. So my mother having dreamt that I shouldn't stop studying until I get to that red gown. So we came back from Robben Island that day and we went directly to upper campus where gowns are collected. Somehow, I don't think she was convinced that I'm going to wear that red gown until I came out. While they were waiting in the car, I came out the red gown and she just ran and came and hugged me with that gown.
So I'm sure she must have ululated as well. I mean, as Duckies, when something like that happens, you know, there must be some ululation, even if it's in a space that doesn't normally hear ululation.
Yes, those are very important. The celebration without ululation is not complete.
Yeah.
In fact, other people would call it Tagazelo or Isbongo. So Tina is in Rebellion. Yes, Reto. Yeah, so in us it would be like Chukuri Tabilo Homuna Kalawel Mushang, Ponchang Kenya Matarai TH, Marakalala Chimongwe, and then she'd go on, and that's where you feel like now you are really being honored.
She's touching the real you now. Eh?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, but the question that I have, Doc, so this red gown she had in her head, did she tell you where it came from? You know, this dream that one day you must have that red gown.
Well, it was white for her. So it started with white because when she was working. So one thing I didn't mention. So my mother got an offer when Johnson & Johnson South Africa opened in Midrand. Those were like 1981. So she got a job opportunity there. But when she went to a commissioner to have papers sorted so that she could work, because she was coming from Leboa. And then
it's a different country.
It's a different So this is painful though, but so what happened when she went there to present the so actually they stamped it that she has to be deported back. So she lost an opportunity to work there. So that was very painful because Johnson & Johnson was this pharmaceutical big giants that I think they're still there. So yes, I mean the actual building when it was open, they're still occupying the same space. So that was sad, but luckily there was another institute that opened that was called Portland Cement Institute, where actually people in engineering would train into that. Luckily she made into that. So when she worked there, her manager would ask her once in a while to come and help them at home. So at home, there was the manager's son was actually a doctor. I think it would have been someone who would have been an intern in today's language. Yeah. So would come and actually give my mother his lab coat. My mother would kindly iron it. So the story is that my mother would look at that lab coat and say, I think my son should do this.
One day.
So the dream has been a white lab coat. But when I told my mother what I really wanted to do, and the connection was actually to the red gown, and then that's where the dream has always been there. But then, funny enough, after the red gown, I'm still stuck with the white lab coat, right, in the lab. So the dream is there, yes.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful, Doc. Okay, so there is also an encounter with Professor Mayosi. One Christmas day, somewhere in Cape Town, you met, with Prof. Mayosi, and that chance meeting turned out to be something very good for you. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it was Christmas. So 2004, I was a first year master student, and I went to Mowbray. There's a place called Mowbray just next to UCT, the other side. So I was in that area. It was Christmas, and I think many stores like Pick and Pay were closed. So I went to that spot to buy something for Christmas, and I saw Prof. Mayosi there, and he was, in fact, I don't think I greeted him because I would be like, wow, this person is up there. So I think he approached me, said, Kunjan. Yeah. So he's very strong in Connect. Even when I had some of the awards you mentioned, when he congratulated me, he would actually say, Ngosi. So that courage, and that electrifying effect it have on people, that sense of presence, very, very inspiring. I got it in Spa, actually, and in Spa supermarket in Mowbray. And I can't remember exactly, but when outside, he didn't shook my hand, was wearing his white shirt. And then he said to me and then say, what do you do? And then I told him I'm actually a master's student at GCT. And then from there, he didn't hesitate to ask the usual questions that many people that inspired know the questions that, what are your plans?
What are your plans? Yes.
from there, he became my mentor. That I visited his lab when I was finishing masters. Before the upgrading was, he was a cardiologist, and he also had science. He had rheumatoid genetics in rheumatoid diseases, pericarditis. He had like very broad, interesting areas. Widely published, coming with grants, practicing medicine, starting work at 5 o'clock, living as the latest person, inspiring everyone, maintaining that smile. So that's the ultimate role model. And then so when I went, I wanted to work with him, and he didn't reject me, but he said, because he asked what I wanted to do, and he felt like he wanted to work with me, but the area he's doing doesn't talk to my dream of wanting to find TB or AIDS cure. So he actually told me he's going to find something for me. And then he talked to a guy who had just come from Oxford. His name was Gordon Brown, who had just come from to UCT to be part of the Institute of Infectious Diseases. So they played squash together, and Bongani, long story short, talked about me, and that guy approached me and said, Bongani want me to work with the guy. So Bongani actually checked how I was doing. So we had like 3-month, like quarterly meetings, and we meet to check on my progress. Even after finishing, when I finished my UCT years and I was going to Boston, he's the last person that saw me. And when I was coming, the person who always wanted to recruit me. And also when we were in Massachusetts, in Boston, so he would be invited to New England Journal of Medicine when they actually, the journal. So my boss at Harvard now is actually the editor-in-chief of New England Journal of Medicine. So we invited Bongani to be there, but also students and trainees in cardiology at Harvard invited Bongani as a keynote speaker to really like a single speaker for the day. And when he started with that when he talked about IMPI, which would be like some of his studies, when he demonstrated what IMPI is in the Zulu, and with this ever presence, you would feel like goosebumps. You'd see people like Harvard actually moved. So he had this effect to whatever he touched. So he touched me back in 2004, but we maintained being in contact until his passing. He was my great mentor, career development wise, and many people would attest to that love to develop others. And for me, it's my inspiration that if I could actually get a little of that and be able to influence others, that would be like a dream true, yes. And to live his legacy, yes.
Yeah, and that 1,000 PhD vision that he had, you're part of that, right?
Well, I'm part of contributing towards that, I think, because I think I got my PhD when I was very young, and I think I was a bit not irresponsible, but I was maybe not ready. If now look at the gravitas that comes with PhD, then kind of change you expected to make it society. So I was like approaching my 20s, and 2008. Now you mentioned it's 13 years ago. Actually, I didn't imagine that I've had PhD for 13 years. So, but still, I'm like, So that in itself, I feel like So he came more when he got in 2006. He became head of medicine. For 10 years. So when he got into medicine, in the middle, the transformation he brought at University of Cape Town, the confidence in including young Black, like doctors who are interested in research. So he had those scientific babies right now who are leading, and then who are actually, some actually started labs, some actually specializing. And I think it multiplied. So I would say, yes, I'm one of those, but also in terms of contributing, because so we also had a personal relationship where he would actually ask me to write letters for people who are applying for Nuffield Fellowship to Oxford, who are medical doctors. And at the moment, as I mentioned, I also trained people who are medical doctors, for instance. Like I would have a PhD student even now who's already specialized. And then I would also have people who came from medicine to do honors. Others would want to spend time in the lab. So overall, I think the dream I see of MyOS is more achievable if we can introduce what we call in the US is like Harvard has a program called MD PhD. So when you apply to grad school, you apply for medicine. It's a rare program. While you're doing medicine, you spend first 2 years in medicine, and then you do PhD. After a PhD, graduate with PhD, and you finish off medicine. So when those people are done with MD PhD, so you tend to have where people who are well qualified in broad medicine, and then come and specialize in an area that's unique. So those things, I think, if they happen here in South Africa as fruits of what Mayosi actually had as a dream. But I think the number is increasing, and I definitely think it didn't stop when he left us, because he still lives in us, and his dream still lives on. So I think soon we'll have that 1,000 of PhD
Yes.
targets that we had.
All right. So, Doc, you then got your PhD, red robe, and then the question was, okay, what next? And then you had the 4 years of postdoc. You know, most people, you know, this week I saw a meme on social media. So this meme says, if it says education is supposed to end with you having a PhD. If you did not get a PhD, you are a dropout. You know, no, but you know, social media type of stuff. But it got me thinking, oh, okay, so all of us who didn't get this PhD, then technically we are dropouts. But anyway, that was just a social media thing. But anyway, so most people don't know that there is life, there's more work to be done even after you've had your PhD, which is what we call, you know, the postdoc, you know, space. So you did a 4 years of postdoc with UCT. Now let's get to the TB part, because I think that's where the issues of immunology and TB. Just talk to us about that. What was the attraction to do that postdoc and focus on the issues of TB and immunology?
To start with, throughout my research career, I've always worked on TB, but I transcended different fields, like 4 times changing fields, but the focus always being TB. As I mentioned, in chemical pathology, we're interested in mechanisms utilized by the actual bacteria to detoxify first-line drugs as a way of trying to develop, as a way that is linked to resistance. So when I got into immunology with Gordon Brown, I worked on how our innate, so there's something called innate. So immune system has various arms. There's innate and adaptive immune system. Adaptive is like T cell responses and so on. And then there's things like humoral, which is antibody-mediated response to diseases. So I was really interested on how our immune cells, particularly innate immune cells, which are cells called macrophages, some are called dendritic cells, sometimes neutrophils. So these cells have receptors on their surfaces, and they use these receptors to sense disease-causing microorganisms. For instance, when a bacterium that causes TB gets into our cells, they actually have a ligand that interacts with a receptor, like of these cells, and that's how they are engulfed. They're eaten by the cells, and the cells would actually use an ensuing immunity that would help the killing. But there has to be a recognition of a disease-causing agent for our cells to be trained and know what enemy I'm dealing with and what immune system do I need to mount to kill. So I was really interested at innate immune system, working on receptors that are expressed by macrophages. And then I worked on TB interaction with immune system, and I worked on Candida albicans, which is one common fungal infections amongst HIV infected. And there's also aspergillosis, and as well as I worked with Staphylococcus. So I was really interested on infectious diseases and at the interface of innate immune system, and see how we can actually empower the immune system to recognize pathogens in time, so that they can actually trigger an immunity that will kill before these pathogens establish the disease. So that's one area with Gordon Brown. So then, yes, it was TB too, the main focus, although I worked on Candida albicans related to HIV and so on. And then going to Harvard, I worked on TB.
This is the second fellowship now, because it was the first fellowship for 4 years at UCT. Then now you got another one now to go to Harvard.
Yes. So the idea to go to Harvard was probably just to sense a busier environment and to know maybe I could fit in. So I was recruited actually already when I was doing 4 years, I was recruited to come and work at KRIF, which is now Africa Health Research Institute. But I thought it was too early for me to start as an assistant professor then. So what I did, I actually applied for postdocs, and I was lucky to get into Harvard. And then I spent 4 years there, from the beginning of 2012 to the beginning of 2016. So at Harvard, I worked on TB, but I was working on lungs from people who have severe damage in the lung because of TB disease. So some of those people undergo surgery, which would be called pneumonectomy or lobectomy. Yeah, so this is where they remove a part of the lung that is severely damaged. So
Yes.
then I would study, so these molecules that are immune aggregates of cells in our lungs that develop to surround bacteria that are called granulomas. So
Granulomas, yes.
these structures contain bacteria at the center, and they have a cluster of well-organized cells. So we believe these structures are containing bacteria that even when people are infected, say the so-called latently infected people, can have those granulomas and not develop the disease because granulomas are intactly controlled. But
Yes.
but things go wrong that these granulomas that we think are good, they can start forming things called calciums. So calciums is this when someone does surgery in the lung, it looks
Yeah.
like a milk like a cheese-like thing, whitish
Yeah.
thing. So
Yes.
that those are calciums, and those can liquefy when they fall off and the bacteria is contained in there. The bacteria then is exposed to the
Right.
airway. So basically, I look at my work at Harvard, looked at how a granuloma, that is a very attractive structure, can dissociate to unattractive structure that even enables dissemination of the bacteria. So my work was
Yeah.
characterizing all proteins associated with pathological stages of disease damage in the lung. And then we
Yeah.
developed those, we identify those proteins, which we think are drivers of pathological damage. And then
Yeah.
they give us this biomarker. So they are actually biomarkers to tell someone that there's damage in the lung now. So
Yeah.
one can use that for diagnosis. Or one could actually go to see whether those molecules that go up, these proteins with the disease,
Yes.
then
Yes.
are they causatively associated with the disease? If there's causality, then you want to find methods to try and use drugs to inhibit these disease-driving molecules. This is
Yeah.
now what
Yeah.
the so-called host-directed therapy, because this therapy now is not the one meant to kill bacteria, but is the one that's meant to limit inflammation in the lung, which is associated with
Yes.
progression of disease. So when you say
Yeah.
it's adjunctive host-directed therapy, use these first-line drugs that kills the bacteria, and then you use these drugs that are repurposed, maybe to limit
Yeah.
damage. Like if it's anti-inflammatory, they limit the lung
Yeah.
damage, and they could shorten therapy. Because also the problem with TB is that my feeling is that by the time someone is diagnosed with the TB, is because they cough, and then when they take their sputum, they check that it's positive for bacteria that cause TB.
Yeah.
But it's because there's already damage in the lung. So we
Yeah.
catch this late. So people need to, even in latent TB infection, from imaging and having signatures that are circulating in the blood, you can get these predictors of the disease early on and put people in preventive therapy before they get the disease. Alternatively,
Yeah.
on the other end of the spectrum, when people are cured of TB, they are cured of the bacteria, but we're not sure whether that lung damage that had already taken place, what is the health of their lungs and so on. So I'm really
Yes.
interested in tissue pathology to look at what secondary damage as a result of TB progression can be targeted by developing those directed therapies, and it could be exploited to develop diagnostic tools that are called biomarkers. So that's the work that
That's
started. My lab is focusing on that, yes.
yes. All right. So now you came back from Harvard briefly to UCT, and then you went to the other side from the West Coast to the East Coast of South Africa. Now you are at UKZN at the Africa Health Research Institute. Yeah, and you actually have your own lab there, what they call Marakalala Group. Talk to us about the Marakalala Group as part of the AHRI, the lab that actually now has your name. I'm almost thinking about this Tagazelo, that Marakalala Group should also have some, what do you call it now? I won't call it an animal or something, but a symbol that comes. Yeah.
You should have an elephant as an emblem. Thank you for that.
Exactly, because you are actually honoring your, your underground crew now.
Exactly. Yes, we're in a window. Okay.
Exactly.
So yes, so Marakalala Group. So when I left GCT, I worked at GCT for 3 years, where I already had a lab, and then I loved it a lot there. But I was recruited by University College London for an associate professor position, which in itself was a great promotion from where I was. But GCT remained my first love, having studied there. and then having made a lot of friends. So UCT kindly offered me a position called honorary research associate, meaning that I can maintain the lab that I left there, and I still supervise students there, and I still left grants there. So I would go and visit Cape Town, before COVID-19, I was striving to go like every 2 months. And then, so I still had a lab there, and people are now finishing off. But the lab at ARI is, as you call it, Marakalala lab. So it's a group where currently I have a postdoctoral fellow in my group, and then at ARI alone, and then I have 2 PhD students and 2 lab technologists who are hired in my group. So we're a humble group of 6, but with more people who are linked in Cape Town. So in total, I could say my group in total could be like 10 people and so on. So we have broad interests. So like a PhD, for instance, a PhD training would have their own project that's linked to hypotheses and questions that are addressing. The questions are largely in research utilizing the samples we have, the lungs as well as blood from people who have disease and those who don't have. And there's various techniques that we utilize, but they take advantage of clinical samples that are available through our research in rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as equipment that Africa Health Research Institute has actually gathered for us to be able to perform this experiment that will answer the research questions we have. So it's been a great move. I have a very great love for Durban myself, and it's winter now, and look, very nice here in Durban, but I also find people very warm, and I feel like taking the beach, for example, as an example, I feel the beach in Cape Town, one can come from anywhere, whether it's a shore way or come from Mlazi, they can own the beach and feel like this is our beach and even sit down in the water. So Cape Town is a comparison, it's beautiful beaches and everything, but I don't think someone from Kailija can go to Clifton Beach during the day in the morning.
Without question marks.
Without question marks. But those are dynamics. Cape Town is beautiful, but I think Durban has access, that someone has an ownership on the beauty that Durban has. People are warm, people are great. Cape Town has those too. I love Cape Town people, but I think I'm more connected to Durban, KwaZulu-Natal landscapes, and the humility of the people, but also the culture. So I feel so much at home here, yes.
As a Ndebele is broadly under the Nguni, the Nguni umbrella of languages, so it makes sense.
That's true. No, that's true. But so it's being, there's also great work going on here in Durban, whether it's Caprisa, they have clinical trials in HIV. RE2, we are opening a clinical trials unit, but we also do work. We follow like 30,000 people in rural areas. We do multiple diagnostics and stuff. So there's also CRISP, which actually does the genomic surveillance and all strains of COVID-19, for instance.
Professor D, was it? He's got a Portuguese surname.
Tulio Deliveran. Yeah, so we are part of a consortium that sits every Friday. Every 2 weeks, we sit about advances, and actually there's been this community of working together with a common cause trying to tackle this COVID-19. So I find with KwaZulu-Natal has this very exciting initiatives that you feel homely. Cape Town too has those, but I found to be part of a very, very inspiring community where you have people like Stem Abdul Karim, Velem Honeycombs, with people like Tulio de Oliveira, and then also have people from Nkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital, Edward, and then rural areas there. So it's a vibrant community.
So now I just want to invite people who are watching to comment or to ask you any questions, about your journey. They can comment on Facebook, they can comment on YouTube. We've got a system that allows us to collect all of those comments so that my support can be able to then post those to you. So I'm basically asking my support to start looking at comments that are coming from people. But I also still want to then ask you, you seem to have done so much work, and yet you are still so young. So what's next for you? You seem to have done it all. I mean, and what kind of legacy do you want to leave? When you eventually decide I'm hanging my research thingy now, I am retiring.
Thank you for those kind comments. Yes, I just passed 40, so I'm not that young anymore. Because in academia, they tend to call people young scientists, but when you go to corporate world, people in their mid-30s are already CEOs, having great. But in academia, someone even reaches 55 when they're still young scientists. And then at 60, that's when someone is like fully fledged and they only have 5 years. So yes. But what I think there's a lot that still needs to be done. So for me, my legacy should come from I should be able to transfer knowledge to others that would even be way better than the skills that I have. So that's my desire. That one's measure of a scientist's or a teacher's progress should be through success of their trainees. A success in this case, meaning way better than how you are. Like I told the story of my mother. I think my mother is very successful in counting my students because of me being lucky enough to go beyond her. So I think with trainers, they should actually, supervisors should actually aspire to develop what's even better than them. So the ability to transfer knowledge throughout Africa. So if I could have resources where there were good funds, where I could actually have a student by the end of my retirement coming from each country in sub-Saharan Africa, going back to their country to do the same that I've done. So I think this is what multiplication of education opportunities. So, but in terms of sorry?
There's one question that has come up already. So once you are done, we will attend to that question.
Okay. Yes. So if I could also be able to register one drug, well, let me say therapy to tell apart from 3 drugs. So this is a drug that helps. If I can have a drug that came from my lab, that would actually go to a shelf and try and reduce the time it takes to treat TB through augmented therapy. So just one should be a great achievement that would help many people who respond poorly to current treatment protocols. Because TB has been with us so many centuries, and we still, despite availability of treatment, we're still actually struggling to deal with the challenge of TB, where over 1.6 million people still die every year. So we need fresh ideas. So if any idea from my lab can contribute towards shortening therapy and helping boost current treatment protocols, that would be enough. I could retire.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, let me ask my colleague Nwabisa to actually ask you the question that has come through. All right.
Okay.
Nwabisa?
Hi, Doc. Hi, Doctor as well, Marakalala. Okay, so we do have 2 questions for Mohau Magaza. Okay. The first one, hi Jackson, well done in all your achievements. Do you still sense that it's your call to cure HIV? And in the second, how did you find transition from postdoc to leading your own lab? Those are the only questions we have. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me recognize Mohau is currently a postdoc at Seattle, Washington University in the US, who went to as a PhD, and is one of the people that I was very excited to see grow. And so it's exciting to see people from far away at Seattle, actually. So the question is about the dream for HIV to still find the cure. Somehow when I work on TB, we also work on patients who are quite infected with HIV and TB. Although my grants, because I'm funded by Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so they are TB specific funds. But once I sort of well settled in TB questions, this is where I'm going to integrate more the co-infection question. But I think I'm also lucky to have colleagues who are very talented and more well-positioned to find AIDS cure right now. And I think being part of the same community, even through communication, collaboration, that contribution Yes, Caprisa. Or should there be a person come from my lab, for instance, and actually address the HIV question? That would still be part of that success. So the dream is still burning, but I have to count success that we had as a nation, or maybe as a world, where actually currently we have first-line drugs that people can take their viral load to undetectable level and have lifelong decisions that they can actually live normally. It's a manageable chronic. So there's been a lot of advances that are very exciting. That I think things are getting better, and it's exciting to be part of that community. And then on the transition from postdoc,
just Doc. I mean, just to mention on the HIV side, is that also, I think last year, the injectables now, the 8-week injectables, for HIV, whereby people don't need to take tablets every day, one injection every, 8 weeks, it will go a long way towards improving, adherence and maybe, the outcomes.
Absolutely. I mean, those, if you think personally, if I were to be asked from 1983, when we had like a number of people actually were presenting with sarcoma, things that were related to current HIV, to today, there's been great advances. First, to be able to determine a diagnostic, for people to really use an antibody-based diagnostic in as early as 1983. And then from there, we had AZT, which had already been there for cancer-related things. But actually, it was from AZT, and then we moved to multiple drugs that are targeting different lifestyles of the virus. Then going to the level where one actually sticks to ART, to antiretroviral therapy, they can actually remain healthy for a long time because of viral load going back. And now having to even have like injectables that actually mean that you can take like after 8 months and stuff like that. So those have been very, very great advances in the HIV area. It's very exciting to see such advances in the medical area that we have to celebrate those milestones. And I think things like TB remain stubborn because being there for centuries, that's what I'm saying. So HIV, we're really having great advances, and it's exciting to live to see these advances and actually be close to people who are doing this exciting work. And then the question to Mohau about the transition from postdoc, I think this is very relevant to him. I think so Mohau got offered a postdoc position in my lab while he had an offer in the US, so he was stuck. So I advised him to go to the US and come back to South Africa. So I asked him to really come back to South Africa because we need skills like his, very talented people who actually lead, research stuff. So the postdoc, the model that I did, a first postdoc, and then having a second. So my first postdoc was to learn as much skills as I can as someone who was like a trainee. Second postdoc, Eric Rubin, the guy that I said is the editor-in-chief of New England Journal of Medicine, kindly gave me an opportunity towards my last 2 years of postdoc. That's where the transition was starting. So I was working more like already as not a group leader per se, but I was designing my own projects. Harvard, of course, has resources, so they don't mind when you design. Whatever is boiling in your brain, you can put in a test tube, as long as it's within the questions, the theme. So it would allow me to communicate with collaborators. It would allow me to start communicating with people back in South Africa, to write my own grants. So that was already, even when I was writing papers then, there were more coming from someone who's more like a senior author rather than just a first author. So I was, with my second postdoc, the strategy was that it would be like an interface where I have a low-key independence. And that's why I think the transition worked wonders. But when someone is closer to coming back to South Africa, like Mohau, I would say start applying for grants like early or intermediate fellowships from Wellcome Trust, from NIH, including MRC locally. So when you come here, you hit the ground running with research money when you start building your group.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, Doc, we've been talking about you and academia and research and stuff, but how do you ever have time where you switch off, to relax, and maybe enjoy the company of your family? Are you married? Do you have kids,
Yes, I'm not yet married. And then I have... Yes, so at the moment, I'll tell more about the family, but at the moment, my relaxation is actually, the reason I like Durban is because we have the longest promenade in Africa, which is about 50 kilometers nonstop. So I walk, so my way of walking and taking in the breeze of the ocean and actually watching happy people in the Durban setup, it's one of the things that allow me to switch off, but I also like music. So my son, Lisedi, is 2. He lives in Joburg with his mother, who works at. So he's a great admirer of classic music. So he's on my profile on Facebook. So it's like my best friend and my inspiration. And I think when I get to go to Joburg and spend time with him, whether it's about going to the zoo or walking, So for me, I think family is very integral for any person who works. I don't think I work hard enough, to be honest. I feel like there are times I feel like any other person, I want to put this out there, that we procrastinate quite a lot. We feel like we are mediocre sometimes. We feel like we are not doing enough. So it happens to everyone. There are times where you're meeting a grant in the last minute. So these things happen to all people, that I think is part of training. Part of that actually is we learn as we grow, we fall, and we actually rub the soil and move on. So yes, but I think one of the important things that I would advise to a young person is to find a balance between family and work. That at the end of the day's work that is being hectic, you need to retire to a very supportive family where you can be wrapped by love and stuff. So yes, so my son said he's actually that person that I think at his age, the connection that I have with him is very strong. And it comes from classic music. So we like music quite a lot, that there's very deep things that I can mention that he loves, like from Tchaikovsky's, like stuff like those. So yes, so family is important. And then once in a while, my way of retreating is actually going to Limpopo to rural areas and just being quiet, staying away from internet or anything, and just being with my mother then. That too presents an opportunity to connect to nature. Of course, Durban has that much of nature. So just being in, not Durban per se, but KwaZulu-Natal presents that opportunity. So yes, I'm not yet. Yes.
All right. And I think about 2 or 3 years ago, you were part of some cartoon characters. You and a few people that I know. Tell us about that.
So this cartoons, I think you're talking about Super Scientists Initiative.
Yes.
So this was done by very talented, selfless people here in KwaZulu-Natal. There's a guy called Justin who came from the US, and then he runs Code Makers program where he encourages people in high school to learn coding. Like kids learn coding that we, during our times, didn't have opportunity to learn those kind of exciting developments in technology. So he actually moved that into developing super scientists who are characters. There were people like Prof. Buli Makula. And people like Tumbin Dungu, like Emily Wong, myself, and now we have actually produced much more people. So these are actually cartoons that are super scientists, but based on real characters, people like me, for instance, where I come from, the kind of work I do on a daily basis, what inspires me. I told them that I'm inspired by rural women, African rural women from, particularly from rural areas, women of strengths and the things they do to really get someone like me to be where I am today. So yes, those actually I shared with high school students who can have a fun way of getting motivation into taking careers in medical science, for instance. So you have cards, you have stickers in their laptop, some of them is t-shirts. So I personally started getting a lot of emails even from high school students who try to me that are inspired by me. And then for me to reply to them, they get very excited. So I start realizing that we tend to think, I think this enables us to be close to kids, realizing these are real people who can dream and do this kind of things. And they also have dreams that are necessary and are possible. So that in itself is very inspiring. It's like the way we have super scientists like Spider-Man and everything, but these things are scientists who are wearing their own, and then with different names. So my name, I think on the super scientist, my name is Eradicator. The Eradicator, because I want to eradicate TB and HIV related diseases. So that's, it's like the Terminator.
Yes. So do you ever, as part of your retreat, do you ever go back to some of the schools that you went to just to, to say, look at me, I sat on the same chair, or I was under the same tree, and so you guys can dream, it's possible. Do you do that kind of work? You've already mentioned that you mentor and coach people within, your group, postdoc and PhD guys, and maybe some master's guys, but just mentorships and coaching of the next layer of up and coming scientists.
So starting from the top, so just last week I was giving a talk. I was invited to give a public a guest lecture at Harvard University, where I trained which came as a surprise. And they arranged PhD students a session with me to share experiences and motivate them. So I never thought I could actually go and motivate someone who's at Harvard. But yes, so, and then at UCT, when I arrived, I used to go to a lot of, so I lived at medical residence. We lived like what was formerly Dean space. So I actually sat down with medical students largely in their 6th year, final 5th years and so on. So we talk a lot about, but I also gave a lot of speech, like the final, the leavers, they call them leavers, people who are doing final year in races, they would invite me to share experience. I did multiple of races at UCT, and I would speak to them when I was there. And then University of Limpopo, around 3 years ago, they had this Vision 2023 that they wanted to have a speaker, public speaker who would come and talk. So I was the first speaker there in the School of Life and Molecular Sciences, Life Science and Molecular and Life Sciences. So they invited me to really give this public lectures, the first person to do that, and talk to young undergraduate and graduate students who'd actually like get inspiration from my journey, particularly me being there before. So that has been very inspiring, being part of that. And then high school related, I actually don't do as much as I would like to. So at high school, for instance, I'm part of sponsoring of people who have, like in my village, for example, there's something called Rutehang Misesejane. So there's young people who have taken a responsibility of tutoring like matric students who are in the local schools. And last year, our local school got 100% pass. And I have to give credit to people like people like Khomutso here in Mahai, who I know very well, is traveling abroad now, but is heading that. So I sort of contribute towards with resources to some extent here and there. But I want to do much more. In person I could go, including my former schools. I've been communicating with teachers, but I really have plans to do much more than I'm doing in terms of being there in person. So particularly with resources like bursaries and stuff like that. But yes, but other than that, I'm always welcome, whether it's by Facebook, social media. If there's a kid who aspires to do something and they want to get a word of advice, I'm always available to do that, yes.
All right, Doc, I think we need to wrap up. It was supposed to be 60 minutes, but it's been so interesting that, you know, so we could not just push it fast. You know, it's important for us to get as much as possible from you so that people know that from that village in Khamukopan, it's possible to have a world-class, you know, scientist who is solving problems of the globe. And that's the person that you are. And so on my side, I just want to thank you for agreeing to be my guest, you know, at short notice. This was Friday, I think, when I approached you, and you actually agreed. And I was crossing fingers that I hope you don't have some lecture that you have to give to people in Harvard or some other place like that. But it was your birthday as well this past week.
Yes.
You know, and I like the video that you made where you were thanking people. You know, for all the nice things that they said to you, you know, on your birthday. So for me, I just want to say thank you, and may you continue to be that person who makes a difference, you know, who brings science to solve our real problems, and may you continue to inspire more people, because the work that you are doing is really, really, you know, making a difference. And we've been crying that when it comes to vaccines for COVID-19, you know, we haven't had our own scientists being part of developing vaccines that are developed in Africa. Yes, we have collaborated with the Oxford universities and other, you know, people from the first world. We're good at collaborating, but we need to get to a point where we develop our own vaccines. So for me, when I hear and see people like you, it tells me that it is possible. And this past week, the richest medical doctor in the world, you know, who came from Port Elizabeth, now residing in Los Angeles, he has given, I think, about 3 billion rands or 3 billion USD, I'm not sure, but he believes that South Africa has got the scientists, they've got the know-how. There's just a few things that need to be supported so that South Africa can actually use the talent that it has to produce its own, solutions to the problems facing South Africa and the continent. So you are one of those people who definitely makes one believe that it is possible. It's just a matter of time. And I hope those who then make use of the resources that are going to be given by this rich medic who originally came from, the rich medic is from South Africa. The richest person in the world is from Pretoria, so we actually, as a country, very blessed, and we must leverage, some of these, networks and the people that we produce as a country. Yeah. Yep. But anyway, so I wanted to just say thank you to you for giving us the time, but the floor is yours, Doc.
Thanks. I mean, I agree entirely with you that we are capable as a country, but I want to leave one of the people who was a DVC under Mampela Rampela GCT. His name is Velan Gevers. So he's the person who wrote to Nelson Mandela to propose to have an academy that would serve as an advisory to government on issues of science. And then he also ASAF, Academy of Science of South Africa, and he also built the institute, the glass building at UCT Medical School. He was the first director, Velan Gevers. And then he sort of established, he was the secretary of the Nuffield Fellowship that takes people, including Bongani from South Africa, to go to Oxford. He was a secretariat. He worked with Hans Krebs at, who developed the Krebs cycle or TCA cycle from Oxford. He worked with Lippmann, who was a Nobel laureate too, the second one in the US. And he came back to South Africa as a clinician scientist to work in South Africa when Stellenbosch was literally a college. He joined Stellenbosch, he came to UCT, and then the things he did, they developed biochemistry basically as a field. So he's in his late 80s, and I adopted that person as a mentor. So I want to emphasize the importance of having a mentor in life that would actually check on you. So I want to, that person, Velan Gevers, is like that person to me that even the likes of Mayosi were actually encouraged by the likes of Velan. But for him to really avail himself to people like me who are like at very younger generation compared to where it was like with the Saunders during his time. Yes. So the reason I'm mentioning that, I want to leave people who are listening, especially young people who may think that things are difficult. Message that Velan sent me when I got to Harvard, things were a little bit too busy for me, and also to catch up there, I managed somehow, and I'm happy that the work that we did, which I was leading, was published in Nature Medicine. So that's my highlight there. But to reach there, things were very, very difficult. So I wrote to Velan, and this is exactly the words that I'm going to use for a young person on any other situation that they think is difficult. So he said, Mohlopheni, remember that from time to time, as you make your way to the top, things will be difficult. That is normal. In fact, it's character building, although it may not seem so at the time. The key thing is to have faith in your special abilities and the star or your star. So each person has a star that's guiding them, that sheds the light. Even in their darkest times, they turn to that star that will continue leading them. And I'm sure each person knows exactly what their star is. And just turning into that, even in most difficult time, will surely come out triumphant. And this is what I believe also will come out victorious. This is what I believe even with COVID situation. With anyone who's training who thinks it's impossible, there's a star that guides them throughout. Yeah. So this is how I want to finish this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate this opportunity. The work that you're doing is really inspiring. I've been following your channel, and also the people that you interview. It's very humbling for me to be here and also share my story. I appreciate it a lot, Dr. Fundi.
No, thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much. I will make the YouTube thing available in the next few minutes, but I really want to thank you for giving us your time. You really have inspired us. I said, I can't wait to drink from your well of wisdom. And at this point, I am not thirsty as well. I'm not thirsty at all. I'm actually full, I'm inspired. I'm gonna phone Prof Bong and say, hey, no. You see, I delayed with my concept note. this time around, it's coming. You know, I can't drop out. I must get that PhD. All right. So thank you very much. You know, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you everybody who joined us. I enjoyed chatting to Dr. Marakalala, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Till next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.